I'm going to be showing you how to fillet a round fish. I have a sea bream here, but certainly the technique that I'm going to show you, you could use for all round fish. I would suggest probably just having a look at the step-by-step process that I'm going to be showing you. You can then, after that, have a go at yourself following along with these steps. I would allow about 30 to 45 minutes to complete this skill. Our only ingredient needed here is our sea bream ready for filleting. What I would also suggest is just on the board, you do just think about having a mat underneath, a non-slip mat, or maybe a damp cloth, and that will just help to give you a little bit of security as you're doing it. The ideal weight for the sea bream would be about 800 grams. For the filleting of our sea bream that we have just here, so with this round fish, this will get classified as a round fish and of the category of white fish. So we've got white flesh here. We have two fillets. We have one on this side and then we have one on the other side. Really, the most important thing when you go to filleting this fish is that we've got the right equipment to do it. So that would be a nice, flexible and sharp fish filleting knife. So making sure that you've got that flexibility, and that will allow you to remove those fillets really neatly. We've also got a descaler in case there may be any scales on here as well, so that we can just remove any of those. And then a couple of things that are also useful is a pair of scissors used for removal of the fins, and also some tweezers for the removal of the pin bones. So once you've got all of that equipment ready and you've got your board and your fish out, we are ready to show you the step-by-step. For the ease of filleting, the first thing we need to do is just to remove some of the fins. So first of all, we've got two fins, one on this side and the same on the other side. Just using a nice sharp pair of scissors, just snip those away. We have the two fins just underneath here as well, and it is worth just removing those. So just move the fish around as you need to, just for ease. And coming onto the other side, just this one just here. Now the last fin to remove is what's known as the dorsal fin. Now this one is the one that is across the top of your fish, and I'm just going to pull that up very carefully. Do be careful because it's really sharp, but you can see that dorsal fin just here. These are, as you can see, got really, really sharp ends to them. So just so that you don't end up cutting yourself when you are filleting, it is a good idea to remove this. Sometimes people will keep this dorsal fin on, especially if they're going to cook their fish whole. It's a really good sign that your fish is cooked when this will be able to be pulled out of the flesh once you have cooked it. So sometimes people will leave that on. But for our purposes today, we're going to be just removing that dorsal fin. Just move your fingers away as you get to the top. That takes that off. And then we have now removed all of the fins that we need to, and we're ready just to have a look at the remaining scales that may be on here as well. You can see on the board here just where there's a few kind of scales that have come from the fish. So although this has been descaled, there are still some, especially up by the kind of dorsal fin here. So what I'm going to say to you, or certainly suggest to you, is if your fish has still got a lot of scales on, I would recommend that the process I'm about to show you, you actually do inside a bag, and you have your fish in there, and then you're going to use the descaler or the knife to actually remove all of those scales. That helps to just contain all of those scales and stop them kind of flicking everywhere. However, I'm just going to show you so you can see clearly. All we want to do is just using the back of a cutlery knife just to run along and just to remove those scales away from there. It will make it a lot easier for you to be able to fillet. It will prevent the knife kind of getting caught on those as you are doing that. So do just have a little bit of a go on both sides, just making sure that they have all come off. And then once you've done that, what I would then suggest you do is just to give your fish a rinse, wipe your board down, and then we're ready to start on the filleting process. I'm going to now just turn this over, and we're just going to have a look at the other side. I'm just going to show you with a descaler, you can do the same process, just running your descaler from the tail up towards the head end, just to remove any of those scales on there as well. When you're happy that those have all come away, we can then get started and we'll do the gutting process first of all. We are now going to have a look at just gutting of this fish. So the guts are just in here. If you are filleting, sometimes you can leave the guts in if you want to, but what we want to be doing is just cutting from down by the vent, which is just here, and we want to cut up through where those fins were, just coming up behind the head. So I'm just going to put a little bit of pressure down onto the side of the fish and just using my knife. Sometimes through the skin it's just a little bit tough just to get through to begin with. And then we're just going up through where those fins were, and we're going to stop just here. And you will then see inside is that we have all of the guts which are just in here. They are quite contained, and when we go to remove them, you just want to be able to take them out in one kind of relatively quick movement. So what we're going to do is just to put your hand in behind the head and then just to pull those out. And remove most of what you can see which is in there. If you do find perhaps that there is a few little bits left, don't worry too much because we are just filleting this. If you were going to be cooking it whole, you would really want to make sure that you've got every last bit out. I'm just going to use my scissors just to remove that bit there. Once we've done this, we want to go and give that a little bit of a rinse underneath the tap, and also just dry our board down so that that's nice and clean, and we can get started on the actual filleting of these fish. As with any fish filleting, whether it's round fish or flat fish, you always want to give yourself those kind of guidelines, those markers before you start off the actual process. So what I'm going to do is just where the dorsal fin was, we want to make a cut that is just upper side of where that dorsal fin was lying. I need to make sure that I'm using the whole length of the knife and just not going too deep, just a shallow cut just on that upper side of the dorsal fin. And you can see there that I've just gone in kind of 1/2 centimetre. I'm going to do a little cut down at the bottom, just where our fillet is going to end, and just make sure then that those two cuts have joined. And then we're going to do a cut around behind the head. So it's going to be slightly angled as we come round and make our cut down through there as well. Having done those, we've obviously had the support of the other side as I did those. I suggest what you do now is you turn your fish over and you do the other guidelines. So I'm just going to turn it around so it's a nice angle. You do your other guidelines on the other side exactly the same, one along the upper side of the dorsal fin here, one down at the end, and one round behind the head. So again, not too deep. One down at the bottom and the one round by the head. And we're ready to now take the fillets off. The first fillet we want to remove is what we describe as kind of the left-hand fillet. And what I mean by that is if you just hold the fish away from you with the head away, then it's this left-hand one here. If you're left-handed, perhaps you might want to have a go at doing the other one first. But what we want to do now is just to put a little bit of weight down on the belly area. You'll see that as I do that, it kind of lifts the fish up a little bit, just so it's on a better angle. We want to make sure that we're using our knife in a really nice, smooth, stroking motion. You will hear a little bit of that kind of rasping as the knife is against those bones. And just as you do that, you'll then be able to just ease that back and see a little bit more of what you're doing. the first thing that's going to happen is we're going to hit the backbone and the kind of spine, and you can just start to see that visible there. A really good guide quite often on fish is that you'll almost have a kind of line as to where that backbone is lying. So you can see that I'm just starting to reach that point. I'm just going to release a little bit more just up here. Just going to cut through a little bit there. There we go. So now we've hit the backbone just here. So what we need to do is remember that as we come to this area here, we've got some very high kind of rib bones just here. We've got to be quite careful. We've also got a few little pin bones that we've got to get through here. So I'm going to just show you that next stage now. Now that you have got to that area, we can now start to work our way down across here. I'm just going to carry on just down by this kind of tail end, just down here. Just remember that backbone is just slightly shaped. So I'm just going to run my knife along. Just really nice smooth motion, because if you don't have that smooth motion, what will happen is you'll end up with it kind of cut into on your actual fillet. So nice and gently as you go. Always make sure that you're moving the fish around as you need to on the board rather than you moving around, and that will make it a little bit easier. And I'm just starting to get to the area now where those really high kind of rib bones are, and you can see them just there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just come a little bit further from up this side here. Just making sure that I've cut right through up there. So as I said, this is a slightly more tricky bit. We're just going to lay the knife. I really need to push that knife nicely against those high rib bones. Now, what I would remember is that it doesn't matter too much. If by any chance you take the rib bones with you, don't worry too much, because we can remove them later on if you need to. We can then just come to this last bit. You can see where those high rib bones were, and we can then just remove that off there, and then that gives us our fillet. We've still got some pin bones that we need to deal with, and we've still got a little bit of the belly area that we need to deal with as well. But before we do that, let's now turn the fish over and we can do our next fillet. What you should be able to see from the frame where we've just removed that fillet is a really nice clean frame. There shouldn't be too much flesh left on there, and it actually really helps you to be able to see this kind of shape so that you know what you're aiming for on the other side. To help for removing of the other fillet, what I would probably do and suggest you do is just to cut the head away. This will make it a lot easier. So we can just take that off. Discard that. And now we're ready to go with our next fillet. The first thing we want to do is just down at the bottom down here is I'm just going to just start to release the fillet a little bit, just tucking my knife right underneath, just making sure that that has just started to release that fillet there. And now what we want to do, again, remembering to always turn your fish as you need to rather than your body, and also pushing down on that belly to lift up so that you can see a little bit more as you're doing that first cut. I'm going to cut down nice and gently as you go, using that stroking motion. You'll see that the fish just moves around a little bit more. And I'm just going to turn that so I can go from the other angle. I've just hit now what we described as where the kind of backbone is. So I'm just going to now turn this around, just coming nice and close. Now I can see almost the kind of cross section of that, and that really helps as you are kind of starting to remove this. So just very gently as you're going over those rib bones, making sure you're keeping your knife nice and flat against them. Trying not to remove too much of the flesh. I'm really lowering my knife now, Because if I'm not careful as I'm coming over these, you could just cut through there and you'll end up with quite an odd shape to your actual fillet. So really pushing against those rib bones. And then that just takes the last of it away. Just going to make a little cut just with my scissors, just where that fin was. It's just a little bit coarse to get through. And then we can take that last bit away. Just using your scissors as you need to, just to remove that. We're going to trim that bit away because I've still got a little bit of that fin on there, so we can trim that and sort all of that out in a moment. But that then leaves us with our frame from our round fish, having removed those 2 fillets. And hopefully what you should have is some nice natural looking fillets in front of you now, which we can prepare for cooking. We're going to now remove some of these pin bones. So the best way really of seeing where these pin bones are is if you run your finger, or alternatively your knife, just from the top up by the head end along. You will find that these pin bones become quite obvious and you'll be able to see them and certainly be able to feel them as well. You'll also, as well as that, feel a few down the end. What we need to just remember with these pin bones is that they actually stop about halfway. So they're only just this little kind of upper area just here. It is essential that we want to take them out. So what we're going to do is just to use some tweezers. And I've got here just a little pot of water so that every time I've removed a pin bone out, I can just dip my tweezer back in and it will just remove that nice and clean. You need to give me clean tweezers again. When you're doing it and you go to take any pin bones out, just get hold of the pin bone, support the fish, and then pull those out. Just being really careful as you go not to destroy any of the texture of the fish, not to be too vicious with it, just because it will really ruin that lovely smoothness that you've got on your flesh. So working your way along, also down the end here if you feel any pin bones. So I can just feel one down the end there. We want to just make sure they're often the ones that get forgotten about, the ones on the end. So do just make sure you have a little feel just there. I can then just feel a couple more. Try not to, as you heard probably then, just where it almost sounded like it was breaking. So just be careful that it doesn't break any of those bones. Just so you don't get little shorter ones in there. There we go. And then once you've done that, we can then just go to the next fillet and just make sure that we've got rid of all of those bones as well. So I'm happy that that one now is bone free. So we will now do this second fillet just here. So what we want to do now, having pin boned, really gone through and made sure that there's no bones left in there at all, we can now just to trim these a little bit, just to remove a bit of that excess kind of belly area up here, which is just quite fatty. But first of all, just down here, I've left a little bit of that fin that was on. So I'm actually just going to, with my knife, just run my knife along just to remove that little bit that was just down there. I can feel it's really coarse and quite hard, so we just want to make sure that that comes off. And then looking at the belly area, now the main thing is that you don't lose the shape. What you don't want to do is make a very kind of obvious cut like that, which ends up with the fish having quite an unnatural shape. So just before you cut, just have a little bit of a plan of where you're going to cut, and then we're just going to cut now and just bring that around a little bit, just so it keeps that nice natural shape. That's one fillet done, which I'm going to put onto my plate. And we're going to now do the second one, making sure again that you're just following that shape around, removing that belly area. Just going to do a tiny little bit of the trim just down there. And then I'm happy that these are done, completely prepped, and we're going to place those onto a plate, cover with some cling film, And then we're going to put those into the fridge until we need them. So I'm going to now join this fillet over with our other one. I am just going to place them onto the plate, just skin side up. We're going to try and get nice crispy skin later with our fish, so that will just allow it to dry out a little bit. And we will cover those loosely with some cling film and into the fridge. We have now completed the filleting of a round fish. So hopefully in front of you, you have two beautiful looking fillets and you've really enjoyed learning this skill. I remember learning it and being so satisfied that I'd learnt that technique and mastered it as I practiced more and more. So do remember, keep practicing. It will become easier as you do it. And I know it's a technique you will return to many times.